Hey everybody in the VC, it's Matt. Hope you all are doing well. I'm a little under the weather. I don't get sick hardly ever, but something's going around and it's kind of knocked me for a loop these last couple of days. So bear with me. Hopefully I don't pass out and expire in the middle of the video, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, this is a funny little album that I want to talk about today. And of course I had been reviewing Beach Boys albums in chronological order. It's been a while since I'd done one, and the reason for that is that I ran out of albums. I got up to Wild Honey, and I didn't have the next several albums, so I had to get those. I went and bought some at record stores, bought some online. This is one that I ordered online, and everything else I ordered showed up in a couple of days or so. This one was it was a big headache to the boring story, and who cares? But anyway, took a while to get it. I finally got it. When I got it, of course, I wanted to give myself several listens before. I didn't want to just listen to it once or twice and say, hey, this is good, this is no good. Wanted to let it sink in and familiarize myself with it because I really was not familiar with this album at all beforehand. Um, and also, when I was doing the Kinks albums a year or two ago, I kind of made that mistake with some of the 70s albums that I didn't have before. I just listened to them once or twice and did a review, and kind of watching those a year or so later, my opinion of those albums has changed in a lot of cases. So anyway, this came out June 24th of 1968. Majority of the album was recorded in Brian's house in California there. Beach Boys play on it. There's some session musicians, some horns and stuff. Funny album. This is kind of uncharted territory for me at this point because, like most people who know the Beach Boys know the hits, everything pretty much stops after Pet Sounds. As far as you still hear the old hits on oldies radio, you rarely ever hear anything past 66, 67 or so, with the exception of some of the stations that'll play. You know, they had a couple of hits in the 70s with Sail on Sailor, and then of course Kokomo in the 90s, but much past God Only Knows and Caroline No and Good Vibrations, that's pretty much where it ends for most people, especially in America. Thing is, these albums that came out sort of what will be the period 67, 68 through about 1973, for people that are big Beach Boys fans, a lot of them consider this to be sort of the band's golden period, or a second golden period on top of the first one, of course, the early 60s songs, all the hits with California Girls and Help Me Rhonda and all that good stuff. So, but of course, to most, most people are unfamiliar with these because I don't know if they got much or any airplay when these albums were brand new in 68 and 69 and so forth. But they certainly didn't, at least where I live, past that. I got this album, I was looking at the track list, none of this stuff looked familiar. And when I played the album the first time, I didn't really recognize, haven't ever heard any of these songs. So, and true to form, I mean, at this point, the Beach Boys were passe, yesterday's news, has-beens, considered square, considered past their prime. Probably not really considered at all by most people, which is kind of funny because, you know, just a couple of years before, they had been a huge, you know, concert draw, having hits, topping the charts, and they were a big group right there with the rest of the other 60s big groups, but they'd kind of been passed by, and because of the whole Smile and so forth and so on. This album only reached number 126 in the United States, which was the band's lowest chart performance ever at that point in time. Over in Europe and England, they were still a little bit more popular, and in the UK, this got to number 13, so quite a bit better. Some people I've heard have described this as sort of their hippie phase. I liked them when they were hippies, is what I heard someone say, which is kind of true. So yeah, this is the third album in a row to be credited to the Beach Boys as producer, as opposed to being produced by Brian Wilson. Brian, of course, had produced all their albums before that, with the exception of the first, I think the first two, but definitely the first one. It's a funny little album. It's First time I played it, actually the first couple of times, it's very lightweight. The songs are short and sweet. There's only two songs on here that are 3 minutes long or longer, and you've got some that are considerably shorter than that. First couple of times I played this album because I really liked Smiley Smile, and that's a weird album, and I can see that that's a album that people would either really like or really dislike because it's just so weird and out there. I really loved the album right before this, Wild Honey, and I could see where, of course, um, sorry, I could see where most people that like the Beach Boys or like 60s rock would love that album, and it's kind of a shame that it didn't get more exposure or more notice because it's just a great kind of a soulful rock and pop album and just an upbeat, great album. This one's very low key, very sunshine pop, very kind of subdued and muted. There's no really upbeat rock and roll or anything on this, which is fine, but the lyrics in a lot of cases are a little hippy dippy and of their time, kind of silly. And so that was my opinion when I first heard the album the first few times, was that it's kind of nice, it's kind of pretty, but it's pretty insubstantial too, and it's just kind of just a slight little thing of an album. The funny thing is, and I still would prefer Wild Honey to this. I still prefer Smiley Smile, even though in a different way to this. But the weird thing about this album is, I said I played it several times because I didn't want to just hear it a couple of times and say I don't like it. So I played it, and then when I would be at work or wherever, the songs keep popping up in my head and playing through my head, so it stuck with me. So it kind of gets up under your skin and grows on you. And I played it some more. I just played it today, as a matter of fact. So at first appearance, for me anyway, and I know this album has a lot of has fans. I don't know if it has a lot, but it has fans. Um, but for me, my first impression was just sort of, yeah, it's okay. But it's grown on me, and I like it quite a bit more than I did initially. So there's only, and the other thing on here as well, there are songs on here I like. There is no just hit you whammy flat out hit like every Beach Boy album up to this point had had. Well, I guess with the exception of Smiley Smile, which did have good vibrations, but that had been out like a year or so at that point. But I mean, there's no God Only Knows or California Girls or I Get Around or Help Me Rhonda or Warmth of the Sun or anything that you hear and you're like, that's a hit on here. It's just a collection of songs, some slight, some good, overall mostly good, but there's no, there's no radio friendly, really guaranteed pop hit here, I guess is what I'm saying. There was 145 released from this album. It didn't do very much. It got to number, I think, 47 in the US and number 25 in England, and we'll get to that by and by. The band, his first album in true stereo for the band since their Christmas album back in, what was that, 1964? So, and this was never released in mono, for those of you that interested in such things. Like I said, first thing that was credited to the band instead of Brian. The third album that was credited to the band instead of Brian. It also marks kind of the first because Brian was having his problems, we'll say, and which would unfortunately plague him for the better part of the next 2 decades. He would still be in the band and still contribute, but he was his grip of control on the band had slipped quite a bit by this point. And so this is kind of the first album where you get substantial input, songwriting and so forth from other members of the band, which turns out not to be such a bad thing. They had some good stuff to contribute. So what else? The band, of course, like I said, was basically forgotten in America. They schedule a concert at the Singer Bowl in New York, whatever that is, someplace that has a capacity of 16,000. They only managed to sell 800 tickets and ended up canceling the show, so that's kind of where they were at this point. And this being 1968, listen to this album now, you can kind of see that with everything that was going on with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Jimi Hendrix and the whole San Francisco Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, and from over in England, things like Cream and so forth and so on, that Sly and the Family Stone coming on and all that good stuff, that this would, and I'm not sure that it got much radio play, and I'm not sure that very many people ever bought the thing or paid attention to it, but those that did, I can kind of see where they'd be like, yeah, this is pretty lame. But it does grow on you, and in retrospect, it is sort of a calming balm, I guess, to the events of that year, with all the Vietnam protests and Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and turmoil and all that. This is sort of a blast of hope and sunshine, a muted blast because it's not a very raucous rock and roll album, but blast nonetheless. So what? Let's go through the songs. Look at my notes here, and it's okay. First song up is "Meant for You," which is written by Brian and Mike. Mike sings lead vocals. That's one of the, I think there's only a couple of songs where Mike sings lead vocals. Did I get into that where they went to India for the Maharishi, the Beatles, and Donovan and all that? Mike Love went there, and I'm sure when the Beatles got there and they heard the Beach Boys were coming, that Mike Love gets off the plane and they ask him, where's Brian and Dennis and Carl? And Mike says, they're back in California. I'm the only one coming. I'm sure that the Beatles were probably like, because who'd want to spend a month with that guy, right? But anyway, so he's largely absent through much of the recording of this album. He came back in, I think, like April of '68, and then he put vocals on some of the songs, and he wrote a few songs on here. But a lot of the songs are written by Brian or Carl or Dennis or Al. So you get some variety there, which is a good thing. Anyway, Meant for You, first song up. Brian and Mike wrote it. Mike sings lead. Wonderful start to the album. Wonderful song, with one exception. It's 38 seconds long. It's here and then it's gone. And it starts off as this great opening of a song, and it's this rising uplift, just good bouncy song. Good vocal by Mike. And it's over. And I don't know whether the 38 seconds, whether it was meant to be that, or it was just, we got to get this album out and that's all we got, just throw it on there. But really, it's a shame that they didn't take the time to make it a regular, 2 or 3 minute song, because it's good stuff. I mean, I'm almost tempted to knock off points for being so short, but I'm going to go ahead and give it an 8 because I really like it. But it's just a shame that it's only, half a minute long. So then we go to the title song, Friends, of course. It's got, who wrote this? Brian, Carl, Dennis wrote it. Carl sings the lead. This was the sole 45 of the album, at 47 in the U.S., and it got to 25 in England. Good bouncy pop. It's got a nice little bits of kind of funky guitar in it. White boy funky, but all the same. Good bouncy song. It's not quite the, like I said, not quite the classic hit of, say, God Only Knows or Surfing USA or anything, but it's good, and I can see where, compared to their other hit singles, and they really wouldn't have mattered at this point how good it was, probably because in America people had just forgotten and didn't care about the Beach Boys at this point. So short of them coming up with Hey Jude or something, they probably weren't going to have a hit anyway. But it's nice. It's a bit slight, so I can see why it didn't really chart that well. But it's a good song. It's upbeat. It's nice. I give it an 8. Third song is Wake the World. This is Brian and Al Jardine wrote it. I think this is the first songwriting credit for those two. to share a songwriting credit. Brian and Carl sing the lead. It's it's a melancholy song, but it's an upbeat song at the same time. It's got a tuba like tooting little tuba bleats to drive the song along. So it's a great. It's only a minute and 29 seconds, but it's a good song. I give that an 8. Be Here in the Morning is another great song. This is written by Brian, Carl, Mike Love, Al Jardine. Brian and Carl sing the lead. Nice harmonies. It's sort of a spiritual type song, or just maybe for someone important in your life to be with you throughout the day or in the morning. I'm guessing. Sounds like it has a ukulele in there in the background. It's kind of a neat touch. I like it. I'm giving that a 9. Song number 5 is When a Man Needs a Woman, which all 3 Wilson brothers had a hand in writing, according to my notes, plus someone named Steve Kartoff and John Parks. I don't know who they are. The organ in this is really nice. Brian sings lead. Got a nice soulful vocal in spots. The organ is great. The lyrics are just sort of dippy and wet. It's about the joy of having a baby, I guess, which is certainly a joyful thing. I don't knock that, but it's, what's that god-awful song from the 70s, The Cat's in the Cradle? Kind of reminds me of that, just sort of lame, wet lyrics and just silly. And the sort of thing that, it's like the person that has a baby and they want to show you all the baby pictures and you're like, it's cool if it's your baby, but you don't want to look at someone else's 100 baby pictures because, and the organ's really good. The lyrics are dippy, but this is a song that I thought, man, this album's pretty slight. This album's not much to it, but that's the song. The music is great, and that just kept playing through my head, and in a good way, not in an annoying way. The lyrics not so much, but so it's a good song. The music's great. The lyrics are silly, unless you just had a kid the other day. I guess it'd be cool for a day or two, and even then you'd probably get tired of the lyrics. But I'm going to give it a 6.5 based on the music. 6 is Passing By. This closes side 1 of the album. This was written by Brian, Carl, and Al. Written by Brian and sung, as such as it is, by Brian, Carl, and Al. It's not really singing, it's just sort of harmonizing, which the Beach Boys, of course, kind of are known for there. Very beautiful, uplifting. Keyboard is great in this song, where it kind of builds up and swells. The harmonies are great. It's a slight thing of a song, but it's very pretty and very moving. It reminds me sort of like a film, like a camera mounted on a helicopter, and you're shooting just nature scenes, sort of a travel log where you're seeing glaciers or mountains or cities or flying over woods and lakes or something. Someone, I had read something about it, said this is what it sounds like when you walk into heaven, which seems apropos too, so maybe so. Anyway, that ends up side 1, and I gave that song a 7.5. It's a beautiful thing. It's just a quick, actually that's 2 minutes and 24 seconds, so it lasts for a while, but it's a bit slight, but it's very pretty. We move on to side 2. Side 2 opens with Annalie the Healer, which was written by Mike Love and Brian, and sung by Mike. So this is Annalie, and I don't know why, or they call it Annalie, but I don't know why the change in sex, but this is supposed to be about Mike Love's experience with in India with the Maharishi, and why he becomes Annalie, I don't know, instead of something else. But silly hippie trap lyrics, not sure about the she part. The music's okay, it's kind of bouncy, it's a pretty slight song, and I think this is a song that some Beach Boys fans consider one of their better ones, but for me it's just a 5. I'm thinking of the Beatles, Of course, John came up with Sexy Sadie to chronicle his experience in India, which is by far the superior song. Both those songs of 1968, of course. So yeah, I give that a 5. Number 2 song on side 2 is Little Bird, written by Dennis Wilson and Steve Kalinich, I guess. Don't know who that is. Dennis sings and Brian helps back him up. This was on the B side of the Friends single. Very pretty song. Very kind of thing about Dennis was he was kind of the wild, crazy hellraiser, drunk and running around. And the last one you would ever, the drummer and all, and him, and of course David Marks too. Before he left the band, were kind of the two wild and woolly members of the band. And Dennis hadn't really written any songs. I think there's a few things that he had contributed on the early albums, but this was kind of his start as a writer. And so when he writes, he's very heartfelt and emotional, and it's not what you would expect from him. You'd expect some kind of upbeat, raucous, crazy stuff, I guess. But turns out he was a really good writer in his own way. And this is just sort of a missing things that you had and love of nature type song. Good effective song. I'm going to give it a 7.5. And the other members of the band, Brian and the other members, were even kind of shocked by when Dennis started coming in with songs, because they expected it to be junk, I guess, or they expected it to be, party, party, where's the girls type lyrics. And it's very spiritual, very, or most of his songs, and very heartfelt and tender, and so it's kind of a surprise, good surprise. The next song on the side 2 is another Dennis Wilson song, also Dennis and that Steve Kalinich guy, called Be Still. Really like this song. Dennis sings and Carl backs him up. Very fragile vocal in the song. The song reminds me at some points very Pink Floyd-ish in parts, sort of the like the Adam Hart Mother period Pink Floyd sounding at part. At the very end of the song, there's a little bit of a motif of Child is the Father of the Man, which was a Brian Wilson song from the aborted Smile album. Kind of cool, but Life is Meant for Joy and You're Meant to Be Here. Just a great song, one of my favorite on the albums. I'm going to give that, what did I give that, a 8.5. Fourth song is a Brian Wilson composition called Busy Doing Nothing. It's a bossa nova style song. Basically just every day, him sitting around the house and what he did during the day, just recording his day. He writes his thoughts down so he doesn't forget them. He voices in the song that he thinks he'll make a phone call, but then he forgot the number, then he remembered the number, and he called his friend, but no one answered, so he sat down and wrote a letter, and he, looked at his dog, and it's just sort of not much to it, but just sort of a chronicle of his day. Neat song, neat music. I like it. I'm giving it an 8.5. Fifth song is Diamond Head. It's an instrumental. It's, who wrote that thing? Brian Wilson, and then 3 people I never heard of have the writing credit. But Diamond Head, yeah, so weird. It's the Hawaiian guitars, sounds like Hawaiian music. Kind of not that interesting at the first. I thought kind of you feel like you wandered into a Don Ho album by accident, but about midway through it changes pace and the guitars kind of come in, not in a really upbeat rock and roll way, but it's kind of funny because the guitar part, there's a da 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 da. I'm not doing that justice because I can't sing for shit, but kind of reminds me of a little bit of the guitar part in Live at Leeds, My Generation, the Who album, the live version of My Generation that lasts for 10 minutes, 14 minutes, whatever, where they sort of doodle around on guitar in between the gearing up for the driving parts of the song stuff. And then it sort of goes into sort of a Busby Berkeley old musical style of instrumentation there. So it's not too crazy about the first part, the Hawaiian part, but I like it midway through to the end. I'm going to give it a 6.5. Album wraps up with Transcendental Meditation, which Brian, Mike, and Al Jardine wrote. It's kind of the most upbeat and rock and roll thing on this album. Drums and just sort of action music, which is kind of funny because you think transcendental meditation and meditating, so you'd think a song about that would be sort of soothing and relaxing and healing and peaceful, I guess. But it's pretty upbeat, and it's really just them. I don't know if they're just sort of goofing around. I don't know if this song was just something they were playing around. It was never meant to be on an album, and then toward the end they needed another track, and they said, "Well, let's just throw that on." Or if it was something they meant to be on the album, it's hard to tell. But it's okay. It's nothing I go out of my way for, but it's funny. I give it a 7. So yeah, that's the album. I give it a 7 overall. The Like I said, I liked the two albums before more than I like this, but I do like this album, and I think it's one that I'll play. I don't know all the time, but I'll play it somewhat occasionally going forward. And the more I play it, the more it kind of grows on me. But um, anyway, so yeah, 7 for that, and we'll be back with more Beach Boys. And hope y'all have a good weekend, and we'll see you later.